All right, folks, so here we are at UiPath Studio, and we can get started in this project with the new front template option and select the Robotic Enterprise Framework. That is what we are going to use for this automation. Let's give it a name and a description. And the rest of the options we can leave as default. Hit create. All right, so here we are. Our project is loaded. And before we start actually creating our workflows, so creating our automation, I want to walk you through to the major features of this template, because there are a lot of things happening here. First and foremost, we need to see the configuration file. This file is where we are going to put the settings for this automation. For example, the queue name, the project name, assets that we might need to work with this automation. Everything we are going to put here. And whatever we include in this file, either in the settings, constants, or assets table, the UiPath, the automation, is going to extract this as a dictionary. That means the column A will be our key, and the column B will be our value of that specific key. So we are going to have a dictionary with this column A and B, and we have access to this information from inside of our automation. So for example, the queue name that we're going to use inside of this automation, we are going to insert that in the cell B2, all right? And then we can get that name from inside of our automation. We are going to check this later on, but for now, let's close it. And I want to show you the framework folder. These are the workflows, the XML files that we have by default with this template. And every container here, every workflow is doing something related to this automation. So I'm going to quickly explain what they are, but the name is already self-explanatory. This one here, close all applications, is where we are going to put the code to close the web browser that we're going to use. Get transaction data is extracting the data from our working queue. Init all applications is where we're going to start up our browser and log into the application. Init all settings is reading the config file. Queue all processes is a force close for applications. So let's say the web browser is hanging up, is not loading. It is going to throw an error, an exception, system exception, and then we are going to invoke this queue all process to start fresh. And also, when we start up the automation, the first time that we are executing, we have to invoke this process too in order to, as I said, start fresh. The process workflow is where the most tasks are going to be placed. So extract the text ID, download reports, merge, and so on. We are going to invoke them from here. We're going to have specific workflows for each individual task, but the process workflow is from where we are going to invoke them. Retry current transaction. This is a mechanism to retry the transaction in case of system error, system failure. So this process is already in place. We don't have to worry. So this is one of the workflows that we don't have to change. Neither we have to change the set transaction status and take screenshots. These three workflows, they don't need any changes whatsoever in order to work in our automation. Besides that, we also have the main workflow. This is the major workflow inside of our automation. From here is where we are going to orchestrate the whole workflow. So this main workflow, it's a state of machines workflow, and each one of these boxes or containers, it's a different state with an entry point, an exit point, and also transitions to the next workflow. So let's take a quick look on our initialization. Here's where we're going to initialize all the settings and all the applications. So you can see that we are invoking the init all settings, which is reading the config file. And then moving forward, we are killing all the processes to start fresh every run that we are going to do with this automation. And finally, we are going to invoke the init all applications right here. All right, let me go back to the main workflow. And then once we have a successful run for the initialization, we are going to get the next transaction. If we do have any failure in the initialization, we are not going to retry anything. We are just going to move to the end of the process. This is the transition in case of a failure. But in most cases, we are going to have a successful run of the initialization, and then we are going to move forward and get the transaction. And the get transaction data is essentially executing this workflow here, the get transaction data, which is going to read the data from our working queue. Let's take a quick look. On our entry point, we have some checks in order to make sure that the working queue is available. And then later on, we have our get transaction data, which is going to retrieve the work item from our queue. Here we go. Get transaction item. This it's already in place. We don't need to change for this example. We just have to understand what is the purpose of this workflow. Let me go back to the main workflow. And then if we don't have any new transaction, the workflow is going to be finished. So the transition no data means, okay, we don't have anything to process. Let's finish this automation, this execution. If we do have a new transaction, we are going to invoke the process transaction state. And inside of this state, we have the process workflow, the process XML file. And here is where we are going to include our major logic, our steps. All right, we don't have anything as of now, but we are going to create all the workflows needed to this automation. Let me go back to the main workflow. Okay. And after that, if the transaction is successful, we are going to set the status to success. Otherwise, we have the exceptions, business, rule exception, and system exception, and we are going to set the transaction accordingly. Let me go back to the main workflow. And as I said, we have different transitions for this workflow. And if there is any business exception, we are not going to retry that transaction. We are just going to set to failed and then move on to the next working item. In case there is a season exception, we are going to send this item to the initialization once again. We are going to close all applications, reinitialize the configurations and again the applications, and we are going to get that transaction once again. We're going to retry the same item, and the number of retries is set up on our working queue. We can set up as 1, 2, or as many retries as we want. And that's about it. These are the major features of this particular workflow. And we are going to deep dive into every single step of this automation on the next lessons. And before we move forward with this project, we should change the design experience to the classic one. So just go ahead and click on your project settings. And you should disable the modern design experience. And now we are ready to keep moving with our project. All right, so now let's move on to the next workflow that we are going to create.